Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Dr. Michelle Lee, licensed clinical psychologist and the director of our peers program here at the Child Study Center. And today we are going to talk about navigating the dating world as an autistic teen. Okay, so I want to start this talk because I know we only have 30 minutes together with a disclaimer. So dating is a broad and complicated process, and learning about dating really continues throughout development. And I think dating really can look different for each individual, depending on their goals and what they're looking for. I will also say I'm not going to talk explicitly about sex education or sexuality and autism in this talk, but I think they are incredibly important topics. And I will share some resources at the end related to puberty and some kind of healthy sex education for autistic youth as well. Um, as an holistic or non-autistic person, I really rely on the lived experiences of neurodivergent people to inform my work. I am going to be using identity first language in the presentation, so you'll hear me use the word autistic and neurodivergent. And then I think, just a really important takeaway that I think I will reflect throughout our 30 minutes together is all individuals deserve to have happy and healthy relationships. So again, as we talk about different strategies today, and I'm going to talk about some strategies for caregivers or parents or others supporting teens. Whenever we think about strategies, we want to celebrate the strengths of neurodivergent individuals and really think about how we can build meaningful and authentic connection. And dating can and will look different for each individual. Um, and I think further, whenever we're thinking about dating, is there's really no one right time for dating. I think this is a question I get often, and we'll talk a little bit more about today of like, when should my child be dating? What if my teen isn't interested at all in dating? There is no, or if your teen is feeling pressure of like, I'm a junior in high school, I need to be dating. We really try to emphasize there's no one right time, and there's many possible goals when dating. And one of the phrases we use often when we're supporting our teens and young adults at our center is dating is a choice. We don't get to date everyone, and not also importantly, not everyone gets to date us. And I am going to talk about some strategies and things to think about today, but again, I just want to highlight that what works for some may not be your personal style or your family's personal style, and that's okay too. So I am really, really glad that everyone is here and is interested in talking about dating. And it's something that I am passionate about educating as well, really because I think good information matters for our teens. I think for any teen, like, let's be clear, dating is hard if you're a neurotypical person. Also, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of things that we're navigating. But there's also a lot of media out there and a lot of representations of dating or relationships that may not be so realistic. And so I really am grateful that, as a field, we're thinking more about how to support this, and that you all are here today to think about how can we give some information and start these conversations and support these conversations around dating. So again, today in our relatively brief time together, I'm going to start with just some topics to think about in getting started with dating and what I would call foundational conversations. So conversations you can start having with your teens, even if they may not be in a place where they're ready or interested to date. And again, that's totally okay. I'm also going to talk about this idea of having a social coach and some strategies that might support teens or young autistic adults who are interested in dating and wanting more supports. And then I will go through some resources as well. So before I dive into foundational conversations, I wanted to just share some quotes from some self-advocates because I think it's important as we talk about, some of the things that are a little trickier about dating or can feel challenging, the positives too. So one is from Maya Rose, who is an autistic young adult. If there's one thing that I've learned about having a boyfriend when you're on the spectrum or not, is that we're all very similar. Just because we have autism doesn't mean we don't engage in pon farr. If you have never seen Star Trek, it's a reference to the way Mr. Spock spends his romantic evenings with a female Vulcan. We plan date night, hold hands, and snuggle like everyone else. And from Millie Evans, I love autistic flirting. It's one of my favorite things. And then goes on to share, I think autistic flirting is amazing and should be celebrated. Okay, so one of the first questions I often get is like when to start talking about dating, when should I be dating? There's really, when is a teen ready to date, right? I think these are all really complicated and individualized questions. I think there's not one specific time or age, but what I will highlight is that there can be conversations about some of these foundational skills that are really helpful for dating and safety in dating, that can start early on. Even if you're not quite at a place where you're actively seeking to date. And again, I'm going to share some additional resources at the end of the talk. If you are a caregiver here who is at the stage of thinking more about puberty, or maybe your teen is a little bit younger, how to share some of these things as well. So one of the foundational conversations that, again, you can start even from a young age is just exploring different types of relationships. This is a great resource. It's Sex Ed for Self Advocates and Healthy Relationships. And again, I'm happy to share the PDF of this PowerPoint after the talk. But this is one of the ways that we can visualize and start to talk about how there are many different kinds of social relationships and connections. And sometimes for autistic individuals, it can help to make these boundaries or these distinctions more explicit. And so we can think about kind of who is close to us and then moving gradually farther away. And so identifying some of these things and different levels of relationships can be a place to start opening this topic. Another foundational conversation that I think, kind of regardless of dating interest at this time or not, that can be really helpful is to talk with teens, and for teens also, if there are teens or young adults on this presentation, to be thinking for yourselves, what are the characteristics of good friendships and healthy relationships? What are the things that we want to be looking for and that are important to us? And so some examples that we might give are like sharing things in common, having shared interests, making sure the person is kind and caring or supportive, having equality in a relationship, right? Like feeling like kind of the other person is giving as much as you're giving. And so starting these conversations can be a way to start to think about like, one, empowering an individual to feel like this is what I deserve and have a right to in a relationship. And also think about some of those characteristics you might be looking for, wanting to understand about someone. Another foundational conversation, and this was actually a question that was submitted ahead of time, is talking about this idea of consent. And so I did not come up with this acronym, but I think it can be really helpful in breaking down how we explain and teach about consent, which is that consent is freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific, or FRIES. So the idea behind consent and ways to teach this and talk about this is one, that anything less than a total yes is a no. So really making it clear and explicit, we really need to hear or give, right, this agreement that is freely given and enthusiastic and specific. What we mean by specific and reversible too is that consent can be revoked at any time. And again, I think that's important to teach kind of on both sides of a relationship, right? So teaching our teens that like, even if they do agree to something initially, they always should have the right to say, you know what, I changed my mind. And vice versa, that if someone has agreed to something like physical contact and then they say no, that it's really important to respect that boundary. We talk about kind of, especially early on in relationships, really asking before making physical contact and making sure that it's okay with the other person. And I think importantly, if we do have teens that are dating or are in relationships, we still want to be thinking about consent. This concept still really applies. And so again, I think the FRIES acronym can be a way to kind of explore this idea that's going to be one of those foundational conversations for setting teens up for dating. I want to talk a little bit about safety. Again, I think this could be a talk in and of itself. I think especially when we are thinking about online and social media. One thing to be very clear with our teens is that dating websites are only for people above the age of 18, to be really explicit that anyone can create a fake profile or include false information about themselves online. And then for our teens, or I know this there may be some people supporting young adults also, our recommendation is always that the first time you are meeting someone for a date, it should be in public. You should spend the date together in public and leave in public, meaning that you're not kind of going home with the person or making sure that you have your own transportation to and from the date. I also had a question that came in for this webinar about how do we teach about boundaries? And again, boundaries are something that's really important to be teaching about kind of even before we might even be opening a dating conversation again. So this is kind of one of those foundational skills that we might be thinking about. And we can think about different boundaries. So we can think about physical boundaries. So these are things of what you want and what you don't want to happen when it comes to your body and personal space. So for example, do you want to be hugged? And teaching kids from early on that it is okay to say that they don't want to be hugged, right? If they're not comfortable with that. How close do you feel comfortable with someone standing next to you, right? These are all physical boundaries that we can talk about and introduce the concept that then, of course, could apply to dating. We also think about emotional boundaries, so choices about your feelings and values and your responsibilities. So, importantly, right, for our teens, like, do you want to go on a date? That it's really okay to say no to a date. Really trying to empower our teens, to not feel that pressure if it's not someone they're genuinely interested in or want to spend time with. And then communication boundaries. So choices about how and what and when and with whom you want to discuss issues related to yourself or your relationships. So for example, thinking with our teens and our young adults about who they want to share what kind of information with. Who is going to be a supportive audience for that? What do they want to keep more private? How to find people to date. So this is another question that I think I often get from teens and parents alike. It's like, okay, I feel like my teen has these understandings of consent and relationship qualities. They're really motivated to date, kind of, or teens are coming to saying like, I want to find a partner. What we encourage, and this is really kind of leaning on the peers model, which I will talk about in a little bit, is to really follow your interests. And that if a teen or young adult or really anyone is interested in dating, the first step is really to find opportunities to meet people who share your interests. And so we really encourage things like joining extracurriculars around interests, thinking about particular events, thinking about school events, where there are likely to be other people who have these shared or similar interests, because these common interests or common ground are the foundation of friendships and then potentially the foundation of dating as well. So I want to talk about this idea of social coaching and ways that people in an autistic teen or young adult's life can potentially support them in their goals around dating. I had a really excellent question for this webinar that was submitted ahead of time, asking and naming that many of our autistic teens have variable gender identities or sexualities. And I think we see that variance across the population, but even more so for autistic youth. And so the question was, do I change how I support and the advice I'm giving based on an individual's particular sexual or gender identity? I think for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to keep really big picture and talk about general strategies that we think can be helpful, that play to the strengths and build on the strengths of autistic individuals. But I do think that was an excellent question that I wanted to name, and to be thinking more about potentially how to tailor some of this and explore with your individual teen their identity and what is going to feel most helpful for them in their given community. Okay, so what is a social coach? So we all can use support in navigating dating. And when we talk to teens or young adults about this, right? Like, I think all of us at some point have like looked at a text or an email and showed it to someone else and said like, hey, like, do you think this looks good? Do you think this is the message that I'm trying to get across? And so it can be helpful for the teen to have someone in their lives or a young adult to talk with and who's open to talking with them and providing some of this kind of quote unquote coaching around dating and relationships. So it could be a parent, it could be an older sibling, it could be a therapist or a close and trusted um, peer group friend. Although I think for our teens, we're often thinking about having like a parent or a therapist supporting as well. And this idea of a social coach, right, can be a person who can help decode ambiguous dating situations. If you're a young adult, right, reviewing those online profiles, if you are interested in that or creating that, doing some practice or role plays, and we'll talk about that as a strategy to help with some of these dating skills. And then really to be there to provide encouragement and support. Again, the fact that so many of you are here today means that you are really interested in supporting the teens and young adults in your lives. And so I think being that positive voice of encouragement and support can be really helpful as well. So with that said, there are some effective ways to provide coaching strategies. So if we're thinking about coaching kind of around dating, when we're thinking about the when, we want to think about previewing skills. So maybe you've talked ahead of time of like, okay, like here's how we are going to start a conversation with someone that you're interested in. And so previewing those skills ahead of time. Potentially being available for assistance during the particular event, although again, I think that is going to vary based on the teens and young adults. And then after, checking in about how it went, right? So we're thinking about kind of previewing the skills ahead of time, and then making sure that after it happens, after a teen goes on a date, after a teen, maybe practices joining a new extracurricular that's based on their interests, having that check-in to say, how did it go? And I think that when anyone is supporting a young adult or teen with this coaching, really thinking about keeping it positive. Really staying away from like, oh, like you really shouldn't have done that or things like that, and focus on the future interactions, right? So you did a really nice job starting a conversation with that person. Next time, you could ask a follow-up question, or next time you could ask for their phone number, right? So we're thinking about previewing for what comes next. And so we call this the feedback sandwich. Some of you may be familiar with this with other areas of your life, but kind of the I like, I wonder, I like. So starting with something really positive when you're giving feedback, maybe giving a suggestion for the future, and then coming back to that positive and encouragement. Because again, a lot of these skills are tricky or anxiety provoking, and we really want to empower our teens or young adults to feel successful and encouraged. Using visuals can also be really helpful. So we actually saw some visuals at the beginning of this talk, right? Like the circles of different levels of relationship. There are some nice visuals around consent, of clear signs of kind of what is agreement, what is not agreement. So in general, visual supports are often helpful for autistic individuals. Many times visual processing and interpretation of visual information is a really nice strength for autistic individuals. And so by incorporating visuals, it can really help when teaching some of these concepts. And again, I think visuals don't have to be particularly fancy. I am not an artistic person by any means, but they can be really helpful in breaking down some of these concepts. And we really should include our teens or young adults in creating these visuals. And again, a visual includes like a note on a cell phone app, right? Of like, here's the steps of how I want to approach this situation, or here's a quick visual of how I'm going to end this date that I'm going on, or here's a quick list of what are signs that someone might be interested in me. So I think that using visuals and incorporating them into supports can be really helpful. We also want to think about breaking down elements of dating into specific steps. So I wanted to give an example for how Peers, which is a social skills program that we use here at the Child Study Center and that's used kind of across the country, talks about how to ask someone out on a date. Because again, the idea of asking someone out on a date is a really nebulous, big topic. But we can think about how do we break down these kind of larger interactions into smaller steps. So for example, the way Peers breaks it down is first, we wait for an appropriate time to ask. So what might be an appropriate time to ask someone on a date? Typically when we're more alone versus in a group, usually not when they're in the middle of doing something else like working or in the middle of class, for example, right? So we want to find a time that's relatively private and when they're not doing something else. And again, that might be a step that you're starting with working on, and maybe that's a discussion or a few discussions. Then you want to trade information, which is Peers' word for starting a conversation. Again, the idea is that when you are asking someone out, you've already had several conversations with them. So you've identified that you have some common interests, that you have that person has some of the things that are important to you in a good relationship, in a healthy relationship. You're going to mention the common interest, and then you're going to ask what they're doing at a certain time related to that interest. So maybe the shared interest is a movie. So you might bring up like, oh, there's a new movie coming out this weekend. Hey, like, are you around this weekend to go see it? Assess their interest. Again, we want to think about like, what are some of those signs of interest? This can be fairly nuanced, but thinking about, is the person smiling at you? Are they looking in your direction? Are they continuing the conversation, or are they looking away? Are they saying, oh no, like I'm really busy? Things like that. Then you're going to use the common interest as a reason for going out. Like, oh, since we both like these things, maybe we could do that together. Exchange contact information and tell them when you'll follow up. And again, I know I went through this relatively quickly for the sake of time, but what I wanted to demonstrate is how we might think about kind of breaking this down into specific steps. And then potentially as a social coach with your team, practicing different parts of these steps, or spending more time if there's particular steps that maybe are feeling more unclear for your team. In terms of planning a date. So for our teens, they've had these conversations, they've identified someone they're interested in, and that person has said yes. Another way that social coaches can potentially support, or another way for teens who are planning dates on their own to think about, is to really use the 5 W's. We sneak in how because it ends with a W, but really thinking about ahead of time, and again, potentially using visuals to think about who's going to be there, what are you going to do, where is it going to take place, when is it going to take place, and how, and the how being like, how are we going to get there? Who might need to help us with transportation, things like that. So this can be helpful to think about ahead of time, because sometimes what can happen, right, is maybe the teens say like, hey, do you want to go out sometime? But if we don't have that follow-up or idea, it can be hard to continue that. We generally recommend that we keep dates short and sweet. So under 2 hours, right? And often it is really helpful to have it based around an activity related to that common interest. So thinking about, is there something that both of the teens are interested in or young adults are interested in? That could be something fun to do together. Because for some teens, it may not be particularly comfortable to like go to a restaurant or to sit in a noisy place. And that, I think, is the other thing that we want to think through with our autistic teens is, are there things that they might need to feel comfortable on the date that we can help support with? So does it make sense to maybe think about a quieter place to meet versus a place that's really loud or has a lot of sensory input? Are there things they might want to bring with them that can help them if they're feeling a little bit anxious or a little bit overwhelmed? And if there is food involved, like making sure that there's going to be food that they like or enjoy at the given place that they're going to. So again, thinking about kind of our role as social coaches and setting them up for success. So I wanted to share also some resources around dating and supporting with dating. Um, so as I mentioned, the NYU Child Study Center runs the Peers Social Skills Groups. This is an evidence-based intervention that was developed out of UCLA. We run a young adult group that covers 4 weeks of dating. We also, over the summer, do some virtual, what we call intensive. So it's not a substitute for the full program, but we do targeted virtual interventions that really focus on specific skills. So we do ones for conversations for both teens and young adults. And then this summer, we will also offer one specific to dating that we open to seniors in high school and above. So for maybe individuals with older teens or those who might be transitioning to college and are really interested in learning more about dating, we will be offering that program this summer. I also wanted to share, so UCLA Peers has several research studies happening right now. And the beauty of a research study is it allows them to open up availability to individuals outside of the state of California. So for those of you who might be supporting young adults who are interested in dating, UCLA is currently doing research and offering clinical groups. I believe there's 16 weeks programs on different dating skills. So that may be available. They're also offering some dating related classes. So again, wanted to share this resource for those who might be at a place where they really are wanting more intensive supports around this. I wanted to share several other additional resources. So the Hearts program is another healthy relationships therapy group. Elevatus Training and AANE are both organizations that offer many different curriculums around supporting relationships, supporting sexual education, as I mentioned, that I wouldn't be able to cover today, but that can be really helpful. Similar for the Autism Research Institute, there's a few kind of specific readings here that talk about dating, primarily more towards autistic adults, but I think some of the materials could be adapted for teens. And then sharing sex education and puberty resources. I know that's a question that we often get in thinking about supporting our teens that can be related to dating. So scarleteen.com. As I mentioned, there is a specific sex ed for self-advocates curriculum that was identified by the Organization for Autism Research that has several different modules all about relationships and dating, and then also about sexual education as well. And I mentioned those as well. And then here's a book, It's Perfectly Normal, that we often recommend. I know some people had asked about book recommendations. Okay, and so I think I have time for some Q&A. This is a great question. Can the coach be another autistic adult? Absolutely. I think the goal of a social, I use the term social coach to be inclusive, right? Because I recognize that some individuals may, for various reasons, may feel that parents may not be an option or might be older. The idea is just to have someone else in your life who can provide guidance and support, and who can be a sounding board um, around this. And think about some of these ideas and also be willing to practice, as I mentioned, like potentially doing some of these role plays or things like that. I see a lot of questions about the slides. Yes, I'm happy to provide the slides, including the resource list, because I know I show them very quickly. Oh, this is a really good question, Cindy. Thank you for raising this. Suggestions on guidance and support in the event of a failed date. So the impact of self-esteem. So I think it's really important if we're supporting really anyone on this journey to really validate and really normalize that that rejection is quite common in dating, and it's quite common for neurotypical people and not like for all people, right? For the whole umbrella. And so really validating ahead of time and really encouraging the fact that someone was brave in trying. I think it can also be really helpful to think about ahead of time. Like, for example, if you're asking someone out on a date, to practice what you are going to say if they say no. And kind of role play out. And typically what we say is to kind of gently change the subject and then to kind of exit the conversation, but we recommend against doing things like asking a lot of questions about why not, or inadvertently pressuring the person. And then I think, you know, a lot of the other questions you're asking, right, are thinking about how ways we can build in self-esteem and positive self-identity throughout a teen's life that may or may not be related to dating. And then there is a question, are there resources for adults who were diagnosed late? So not specific, I am thinking on that resource list, AANE is an organization. They have a lot of runnings directly by autistic adults. They also have relationship counseling and counselors who are especially trained in doing counseling with couples, for example, where maybe an individual was diagnosed later. So that might be a place to start. A parent of and then I see a parent of an autistic child can be resistant in allowing their child to date. How can we better help them understand that with the right support, it is possible? It's a really good question, and I totally get it, right? I think even again, parents of non-autistic teens can have a lot of hesitancy about dating. And I think really you know, trying to show parents some of these supports, kind of breaking down for them. I think it's often really powerful to share self-advocate perspectives, right? Like share from the lived experiences of autistic adults. There's many amazing advocates out there who've written books and blog posts and talked about their experiences. And so I think sometimes that can be helpful as well. And I actually think we are at time, unfortunately. So thank you so much. On behalf of the NYU Child Study Center and the Regional Center for Autism, we really appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. You can find a full list of the Child Study Center upcoming webinars, as well as recordings of previous webinars at nyulangone.org/CSC webinars. Thank you again.